Portions of the following documentary may contain graphic scenes of human suffering. Viewer discretion is advised.
Berlin, 1945. Berlin, 1914. There are no ruins yet. In a fervor of nationalism, the troops marched to war, colors streaming and bands playing. Dazzling pomp surrounds the Kaiser. Legends arise about generals such as Hindenburg and Ludendorff, who stemmed the Russian advances in the east and finally take over command of the whole German army. War is brutal. The greatest war to date proves the effectiveness of new weapons of destruction. Poison gas is used, and advance is made with tanks. War is carried on in the air, and a ruthless war at sea with the submarine as a new weapon is proclaimed. The Russian Empire is the first to collapse. The November Revolution brings the Bolsheviks to power, and in 1918, Lenin makes peace with Germany. After the last German great offensive miscarried, the sailors in Kiel light the flame of revolution. The Kaiser abdicates, and the Republic is proclaimed in Berlin. The revolutionary tide carries forward Karl Liebknecht, the man who voted against the war of the Kaiser's empire. He is now followed by the masses. Real power, however, is not with the Social Democrats who have formed a government, but with the army chiefs on whom they lean. The workers' movement is split in two. The left radical insurrection inspired by Liebknecht is crushed by the army called in by the Social Democratic government. Liebknecht and many of his supporters are murdered. At Versailles, the victors dictate their peace terms. The young republic pays the price of a lost war. Alsace-Lorraine becomes French, Posen and West Prussia Polish, and Memel Lithuanian. Germany is deprived of her colonies and has to pay war damages to the victors. Otherwise, however, Germany remains intact. The new free city of Danzig retains its German character, and the Rhineland, although a militarized zone, remains German soil. The war industries are dismantled, and the army restricted to 100,000 professional soldiers. But Germany's sovereignty is not endangered. The Social Democrat Ebert rules as president. He needs the support of the army to maintain the authority of the young democracy in the face of the many national groups which refuse to admit defeat and still less to accept the terms of the peace treaty. The foreign minister Rathenauer is murdered by nationalist fanatics because he wishes to adhere to the peace terms. In Bavaria, the army and the Free Corps conduct their own violent policies and refuse to recognize the authority of Berlin. General von Epp finances extreme nationalist elements from secret army funds. His adjutant, Captain Röhm, hires spies to report on the activities of these elements. One of these spies becomes member number 7 of the new National Socialist Party, on which he is to report. With the help of Röhm's money, he even becomes leader of the party. In 1920, he is the party spokesman at meetings protesting against the peace treaties with the Allies and Russia. This Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889, in the small Austrian town of Braunau, the son of the 50-year-old customs official Alois Hitler and his 28-year-old third wife, Clara. When Adolf is 8 years of age, the family moves to a small house in Leonding, near Linz. Here, father and son disagree. Alois Hitler wishes the boy to become an official. Adolf wants to be an artist. He defies his father. He is a poor sort of pupil and fails in his exams both in Linz and in Steyr. At the age of 16, he falls ill with tuberculosis and leaves school forever. In 1907, he moves to Vienna, seeks admittance to the Academy of Art, but is not accepted. He shares a furnished room with a friend. Turned away from the Academy of Art a second time, he becomes a part-time laborer and hawker of postcards painted by himself. He lands in a flophouse, but considers himself superior to the other tramps. For a few coppers, he buys his first anti-Semitic pamphlets. These are part of the Ostara library for the blonde defenders of the rights of man. In order to obtain certain numbers no longer in circulation, Hitler looks up Ostara's publisher, Jörg Lanz von Liebenfels, who in 1900 founded an order for blonde, blue-eyed men. According to Lanz, the blonde Superman sits differently from and has different toes from the dark and inferior races whose extermination he demands. He depicts world history as a life and death struggle between the blonde and the dark. The swastika is his sign, and for him, the Jew is the devil himself. These pipe dreams are a revelation to the unemployed, starving hermit in the flophouse. Hitler must believe in the difference between people and races so that he can count himself among the master race. His due for military service, he has left Austria and settled in Munich. His call-up papers reach him there, and in fear of the police, he musters but is turned down because of poor health. In Munich, he leads the same life as in Vienna. Only on the outbreak of war is there an end to his isolation and deprivation. On August 1st, 1914, he stands in the middle of a singing and cheering crowd on the Odeonplatz in Munich and listens to the proclamation of the declaration of war. In a wave of enthusiasm, he volunteers and becomes an orderly in the infantry regiment List. He is wounded at the Western Front in 1916, but returns in 1917 as a vice corporal. In 1918, his eyes are injured during a British gas attack, and he is in the hospital when the armistice puts an end to the war. Again, he is an unemployed hermit, a man without family and job. He decides to become a politician and goes to Munich, where the most desperate elements among the Free Corps have gathered. Earlier, the Free Corps was organized to defend Germany's eastern frontiers under the supervision of the army, but now they stand prepared to blow the Republic to bits. In reply to the question whether there are political murder gangs in Bavaria, the chief of police in Munich replies, "Certainly, but not enough." Officers such as Epp and Röhm consider that allegiance to the fatherland implies disloyalty to the Republic. Röhm discovers Hitler's talents and employs him to immunize the soldiers against socialistic and pacifist ideas. On April 1st, 1920, Hitler leaves the army to devote himself entirely to his new party. As a speaker, his theory materializes that a leader is one who can move the masses. He is aware that violence appeals to many and frightens others. Battle groups are organized. Many Free Corps soldiers join Hitler's storm troops, the SA, and start regular battles with the socialists and communists. Unemployed officers like Captain Goering and rabid race fanatics like the schoolteacher Streicher join the party. General Ludendorff is won over by the Nazis. The confused situation in the country serves Hitler's policy. The inability of a bankrupt society to meet its obligations to France results in French occupation of the Ruhr district, which deals a death blow to the currency. The inflation ruins the middle classes and the workers. Hitler holds the Republic responsible for the distress and misery. Consequently, he tries to concentrate all the anti-Republican groups in Catholic Bavaria against Protestant Berlin. On November 8th, Hitler makes a desperate attempt to get the government of the Federated State of Bavaria and the army to join him. He forces his way into a house in Munich where the city leaders are gathered and proclaims a national government in place of the legal federal government. The house is surrounded by the SA. Ludendorff throws his prestige on the scales, and Hitler enforces his will. The Munich government, however, retains its liberty. The Bavarian army receives orders from Berlin not to participate in the putsch, which is consequently doomed to failure. On November 9th, to save the situation, Hitler and Ludendorff, at the head of a few thousand men, marched to army headquarters. Many men later to gain notoriety follow them. Heinrich Himmler is a color guard. After a short exchange of fire, 16 Hitlerites and 3 policemen lie dead or dying. Hitler escapes and is arrested 2 days later. During the subsequent legal proceedings, Ludendorff is acquitted, and Hitler is imprisoned for a few months in the fortress at Landsberg, where he is given a roomy cell on the first floor with good food and the privilege of wearing his own clothes. Full of contempt for an opponent who punishes high treason so leniently, he dictates his book Mein Kampf, an autobiography which turns into a political platform, to his faithful friend, Rudolf Hess. Here, Hitler describes the reuniting of Germany and Austria as his life's mission. He exclaims that either Germany shall become a world power or be ruined. He maintains that during the war, poison gas should have been used on tens of thousands of Jews in order to prevent the collapse. The book was read by few and made a joke of by many. A few years later, they no longer laughed. While Hitler is in Landsberg, the situation improves in Germany. In February 1925, President Ebert dies. He is succeeded by Paul von Hindenburg, the Kaiser's field marshal who, nominated by the parties of the right, wins the election by a narrow margin. To begin with, Hindenburg respects the Constitution, but after a while, his age, his political inexperience, and military philosophy claim their right. When Hitler leaves Landsberg, he has to reorganize the party. He sets to work with well-tried means. In February 1925, the Nazis hold their first large meeting after the putsch. Hitler speaks of Germany's future and our movement, and Jews are not admitted. Even the prohibition against public speaking, which certain German states have published against him, is made use of for his propaganda. The brown shirts began the march to power. In 1926, the party has 17,000 members. In 1927, 40,000. In 1928, 60,000. They have not yet conquered the streets. The streetcars still drive through their ranks. The party days become shows, with essay parades and the veterans Goering, Streicher, and Epp forging their plans. At cleverly directed meetings, Hitler consecrates the colors and inspires his faithful with violent hate harangues. In 1926, Hitler finds the man to organize the party fight in Berlin and supervise the party propaganda, Goebbels. The political battle is now conducted with all means. Fights at meetings and in the streets occur daily. The big parties mobilize semi-military organizations. The Social Democrats have the Reich banner, and the Communists the Rotfront Kampfverbund. Under the leadership of Thälmann, the Communists hold their position. When Hitler comes to power, they are the strongest party in Berlin. Hitler's continued agitation and the hostile demonstrations of the SA are very convenient to the industrialists. They need someone to mobilize the masses against the communists. Money begins to flow from industry into the coffers of the party. In 1930, the number of unemployed rises to 3 million, and Hitler turns their fear and despair to his own use. Hitler gives them faith and promises them work and bread.
Partei gerade 7 Mann hoch war, sprach sie schon 2 Grundsätze aus. Erstens, sie wollte eine wahrhaftige Weltanschauungspartei sein. Und zweitens, sie wollte daher kompromisslos die einzige Macht und alleinige Macht in Deutschland.
This platform gains for Hitler more than 6 million votes and 106 seats in the Reichstag in the elections of 1929. He is now the leader of the nation's second largest party. The Chancellor, Brüning, has no parliamentary support for measures against want. He is forced to govern by means of a paragraph which gives President Hindenburg the right to issue decrees. Hitler blames Brüning for the distress and declares his government incompetent. Hitler now changes his tactics. He will only make his revolution when he has come to power. Then terror is legally protected. Thus, the police have no excuse to intervene against the SA, and he can win the confidence of the army. In several actions against his sympathizers, Hitler swears he wants to assume power legally. He is helped by the party lawyer Hans Frank. It is senseless to ban the brown uniforms. Hitler's men put on white shirts instead and march through the towns as usual. Many unemployed are enticed by the adventurous glamour which Goebbels' propaganda builds up around these processions and the bloody battles with political opponents. Industrialists such as Kirchdorf and Thyssen finance Hitler's next election campaign and hope to be able to control him later. Hitler flies from town to town. Goebbels has discovered a new slogan, Hitler over Germany. The election is for President of the Reich. To become a candidate, Hitler in 1932 becomes a German citizen. His friend Frick, a minister in the state of Braunschweig, swears in his Führer as counselor, which automatically makes him a German citizen. Hindenburg is nominated by the Social Democrats, Catholics, and Liberals. Who will save us from Hitler? Only Hindenburg. Hindenburg is re-elected, and Hitler seems to be on a dead-end street. He is saved by General Schleicher, who exercises his political power behind the scenes. He promises Hitler to overthrow Brüning and proclaim new elections, providing Hitler, until further notice, accepts a government under Franz von Papen, a conservative politician whom Schleicher wants to use as a puppet. Schleicher himself is a member of Papen's cabinet, which is made up of 7 barons, 2 industrialists, and 1 lawyer. The fate of the nation is no longer in the hands of its chosen representatives in the Reichstag, but depends on the way in which Hindenburg exercises his power, which in turn is either decided by his son Oskar, a friend of Schleicher, or at the coffee table at his country estate Neudeck. These men also intrigue against one another. Schleicher overthrows Papen and becomes chancellor. In order to overthrow Schleicher, Papen suggests a Hitler government to Hindenburg, in which the Nazis are to be in a minority among the conservative ministers, with Papen as vice-chancellor and real leader. Thus, Hitler becomes chancellor. The Social Democrats lose their last position when the Prussian Prime Minister Braun allows himself to be deposed without opposition by Papen. The new government meets. The vice-chancellor sits next to Hitler and Goering in the belief that he can control them. That same night, the SA pay homage to Hindenburg and Hitler with a torchlight procession. In the darkness, the terror begins against defenseless anti-fascists who are dragged from their homes and beaten up in the cellars of the SA. The first public appearance of the new regime in Berlin is at the state funeral of an SA man and a policeman killed during one of the nightly battles. The ex-Crown Prince is also present.
vormarschiert. Ein junger deutscher Arbeiter. Aufrecht, stolz. Der Kamerad seiner Kameraden und der Führer seiner Gefolgschaft. Wie all die anderen, die Hunderttausende, jeder vorbei an dem greisen Reichspräsidenten und dem jungen Reichskanzler. Das, was er geträumt hatte, das ist nun Wirklichkeit. Das junge und das alte Deutschland reichen sich die Hände.
On February 10th, Hitler makes his first speech as Chancellor in Berlin.
Unser Führer, der Reichskanzler Adolf Hitler, hat das Wort.
Deutsche Volksgenossen und Genossinnen. Am 30. Januar dieses Jahres wurde die neue Regierung der nationalen Konzentration gebildet. Ich und damit die nationalsozialistische Bewegung traten in sie ein. Ich glaube, dass nunmehr die Voraussetzungen erreicht sind, um die ich das vergangene Jahr gekämpft habe.
Wir wollen nicht liegen und wollen nicht schwindeln. Ich habe deshalb es abgelehnt, jemals vor dieses Volk hinzutreten und billige Versprechungen zu geben. In uns selbst allein liegt die Zukunft des deutschen Volkes. Wenn wir selbst dieses deutsche Volk emporführen durch eigene Arbeit, durch eigenen Fleiß, eigene Entschlossenheit, eigenen Trotz, eigene Beharrlichkeit, dann werden wir wieder emporsteigen, genau wie die Väter einst aus Deutschland nicht Geschenk erhielten, sondern selbst sich schaffen mussten. Deutsches Volk, gib uns 4 Jahre und ich schwöre dir, so wie wir und so wie ich in dieses Amt eintrat, so will ich dann gehen. Ich tat es nicht um Gehalt und nicht um Lohn. Ich tat es um deiner selbst wegen.
In this way, an election campaign starts under the sign of terror. Goering appoints 40,000 SA and SS men as auxiliary policemen, and the terror is legal. On February 27, 1933, the Reichstag burns down. After the war, Goering admits that already before the fire, he had made up lists of communists and others who were to be arrested. The Nazi propaganda blames the communists for the fire, which becomes the excuse for a law outlawing Hitler's opponents. The Dutchman van der Lubbe was arrested in the Reichstag on the night of the fire, and 4 communists are brought to court. The proceedings, however, only show that the Dutchman must have had accomplices and that the communists are innocent. The accused Bulgarian, Dimitrov, says straight out that only the Nazis had the opportunity of setting fire to the Reichstag and gaining advantage from it. His pointed questions make Goering furious.
Jetzt will ich Ihnen sagen, was im deutschen Volke bekannt ist. Bekannt ist im deutschen Volk, dass die sich hier unverschämt benehmen und hierher gelaufen kommen, den Reichstag anstecken und dann hier mit dem deutschen Volk noch solche Frechheiten sich erlauben. Ich bin nicht hierher gekommen, um von Ihnen mich anklagen zu lassen. Sie sind in meinen Augen ein Gauner, der längst an den Galgen gehört.
In the election, Hitler obtains 43.9% of all votes. He still needs the army and the German nationalists. Consequently, the new regime is to appear as the inheritor of the Prussian tradition, and the new Reichstag is opened at Potsdam, the city of Frederick the Great. Army and SA gather in the old garrison church. The old and the new Germany salute one another. The Kaiser's field marshal in pre-war dress uniform, and the unknown soldier from the Western Front in correct mourning coat.
Die Regierung der nationalen Erhebung ist entschlossen, ihre von dem deutschen Volk übernommene Aufgabe zu erfüllen. Sie tritt daher heute hin vor dem Deutschen Reichstag mit dem heißen Wunsch, in ihm eine Stütze zu finden für die Durchführung ihrer Mission.
2 days later, the party shows its true colors. The Reichstag meets at the Kroll Opera, which was replaced the old Reichstag. They are to vote for the law which will make Hitler a dictator. The building is surrounded by the SS and the SA, who in chorus threaten terror if the law is not passed. Providing the 81 communist votes are declared invalid, and Hitler is supported by the German nationalists and the Catholics, his law will be passed. Most of the communists and a dozen social democrats have already been arrested. The remaining social democrats alone vote against the law.
Dass es sich dabei nicht nur um das negative Problem der Bekämpfung dieser Lehre und ihrer Organisation handelt, sondern um die Durchführung der positiven Aufgabe der Gewinnung des deutschen Arbeiters für den nationalen Staat. Die Reichsregierung beabsichtigt daher nicht, durch dieses Ermächtigungsgesetz die Länder aufzuheben. Wohl aber wird sie diejenigen Maßnahmen treffen, die von nun ab und für immer eine Gleichmäßigkeit der politischen Intentionen in Reich und in den Ländern gewährleisten. Es ist Sache des Reichstags, nunmehr seinerseits eine klare Stellung einzunehmen. Am Schicksal des Kommunismus und der sich mit ihm verbrüdenden anderen Organisationen ändert dies nichts.
In order to assume power in all Germany, however, Hitler did not await the passing of this law. Already on March the 9th, Epp and Röhm were allowed free hands for a coup in Bavaria. They overthrow Held's government and take over the key positions in Munich without interference from the army. Old scores from 1923 are settled. Similar coups are carried out in other states. In Prussia, Goering holds the reins. He presides over the Prussian Senate.
Als die Revolution vor wenigen Monaten durch ganz Deutschland brauste, begann sie damit, dass sie das furchtbare System der Vergangenheit, das System des Parlamentarismus, des Pazifismus, vernichtete und zerstörte. Der Führer hat uns auch in Preußen auf unsere Plätze gestellt. Wir geloben, dass jedermann in Preußen seine Pflicht tue. Der preußische Staatsrat ist eröffnet, und er ist eröffnet mit dem Rufe, unser Führer Adolf Hitler, des Deutschen Reiches Kanzler, ein dreifacher Sieg, Heil! Sieg, Heil! Sieg, Heil!
Some months after assuming power, Hitler has prohibited all parties except his own. The Veterans Association, the Steel Helmets, is absorbed by the SA. Their representatives in the government become party members. The unions are abolished and taken over by the Workers' Front. The newly appointed Minister of Propaganda, Goebbels, organizes the fight against free speech. Heinrich Heine once wrote that where books are burned, people are burned. Now his books are being burned, and his Lorelei suddenly becomes a poem by an anonymous author. A German may no longer read Marx and Freud, Barbus and Brecht, Mahn and Remarque, Zweig and Furtwängler.
Das nicht auch die Reinheit seiner Rasse hält, geht zugrunde.
On April 1st, 1933, a boycott of Jewish businessmen, doctors, and lawyers is started. Those so suddenly outlawed began to leave the country. Soon Europe is accustomed to the sight of human beings freighted like parcels from country to country.
Sie sind Deutschland. Wenn Sie handeln, handelt die Nation. Wenn Sie richten, richtet das Volk.
Whosoever stands in Hitler's way is outlawed. This Röhm is to learn. In order to succeed Hindenburg, Hitler needs the support of the army. The essay of Röhm is a threat to the ancient privileges of the army. Consequently, in 1934, Hitler has Röhm and other party veterans executed without trial on the excuse that they are planning a coup. This action is carried out by the SS. Its chief, Himmler, starts out on the road to the highest post in the police. On the party day, Hitler receives the oath of allegiance from the new SA chief, Lutze.
Mein Führer, genau wie in früheren Zeiten wir unseren Dienst und unsere Pflicht getan haben, werden wir auch künftig nur auf Ihre Befehle warten. Und wir Kameraden kennen nichts anderes, als die Befehle unseres Führers auszuführen und zu beweisen, dass wir die Alten geblieben sind. Unser Führer Adolf Hitler sich meine Kameraden, wir stehen fest zusammen für unser Deutschland. Ich übergebe euch dann die neuen Feldzeichen in der Überzeugung, dass ich sie in die treuesten Hände gebe.
The new colors are dedicated by touching the so-called blood standard from the November coup in Munich in 1923. The party is welded together. The army has been given its guarantees. The generals little know that soon Himmler's SS are going to realize Röhm's dream of the one-party army. On the death of Hindenburg on August 2nd, 1934, the government immediately passes a law uniting the functions of chancellor and president. On the very same day, officers and men swear the oath of allegiance not to Germany or the Constitution, but to Hitler personally. In 18 months, Hitler has assumed absolute power and crushed the opposition. The Nazi revolution is a fact. All preparations for the next step have been made to transform the whole people into a single great column of march, which will follow its leader to the end. Under Hitler's guidance, the new state emerges, a state of mass meetings and banners in which the individual is engulfed by the mass, and everyone is gripped by a propaganda which aims at every class and generation. He begins with the youth.
Der deutschen Jugend der Zukunft wünschen ist etwas anderes, als was die Vergangenheit sich gewünscht hat. Wir müssen einen neuen Menschen erziehen. Als es uns gelang, dem deutschen Volk eine neue Idee zu geben und dieses Volk in diese Idee zu einen und zu einer neuen Lebensform zu führen. Dies ist die größte Tat dieses Jahrhunderts für unser Volk. In unseren Augen, da muss der deutsche Junge der Zukunft schlank und rank sein, flink wie Windhunde, zäh wie Leder und hart wie Kruppstahl.
Labor becomes compulsory. Youth is educated in a daily Nazi routine.
Weltmeisterlehrgang mit 190 Führern zur Flaggenhissung angetreten. Danke sehr. Heiliger! Kein Wort, mein Kampf. Am 18. Juli 1925 erschien der erste Band des Führers, Buch Mein Kampf. In diesem Buch gibt der Führer dem deutschen Volke einen Abriss seines schicksalshaften Lebensweges und gibt uns verpflichtend die grundsätzlichen Erkenntnisse des politischen Lebens. Als Leitspruch des Tages ein Wort des Führers über den Wert der Arbeit. Der völkische Staat wird, wenn notwendig, selbst durch jahrhundertelange Erziehung mit dem Unfug, körperliche Tätigkeit zu missachten, brechen müssen. Heil, Arbeitsmänner! Heil, mein Führer! Warten! Immer! Warten! Ab!
Kamerad, woher stammst du?
Aus Friesenland!
Und du, Kamerad?
Aus Bayern!
Und du?
Vom Kaiserstuhl!
Und du?
Aus Pommern! Und aus Königsberg!
Aus Schlesien.
Von der Nordverkant! Vom Schwarzwald! Aus Dresden!
Von der Donau.
Vom Rhein!
Und von der Saar.
Ein Volk! Ein Führer! Ein Reich! Deutschland!
Wir standen nicht im Schützengraben und nicht im Trommelfeuer der Granaten und sind trotzdem Soldaten.
Those who refuse to be educated into good Nazis are subjected to terror, of which the principal instruments are the Death's Head battalions under Himmler.
Wann ich die Augen schließen werde, weiß ich nicht. Aber dass die Partei weiterleben wird, das weiß ich. Und dass über alle Personen, über Schwache und Starke hinweg, in Zukunft der deutschen Nation erfolgreich gestalten wird, das glaube ich und das weiß ich.
For those who do not believe and know this, there are concentration camps. The poet Erich Mühsam, murdered in Oranienburg in 1934.
Nicht der Staat hat uns geschaffen, sondern wir schaffen uns unseren Staat. Nein, die Bewegung, sie lebt und sie steht felsenfest begründet. Und solange auch nur einer von uns atmen kann, wird er diese Bewegung seine Kräfte leihen und für sie eintreten, so wie in den Jahren, die hinter uns liegen. Dann wird zur Trommel die Trommel kommen, zur Fahne die Fahne, dann wird zur Gruppe die Gruppe stoßen, zum Gau der Gau, und dann wird endlich diese gewaltige Kolonne der geeinten Nation nachfolgen, das früher zerrissene Volk.
In 1935, Hitler introduces compulsory military service and begins to create an army of 36 divisions and a modern air force. Foreign countries react with lame protests, but Hitler loves European diplomacy. Thus, he makes a non-aggression pact with the Poland which he is too weak to attack. In this way, he proves his love of peace and drives a wedge into the French system of alliances. The French speak of the need for old enemies to become friends. They remain inactive when Hitler marches into the Rhineland in March 1936. The occupation is carried out by 3 German battalions. If France had opposed him with only a few divisions, Hitler would have been forced to withdraw. Now he is triumphant and offers France and Belgium a 25-year non-aggression pact. Hitler also takes advantage of the strained relations between Mussolini and the League of Nations after Italy's attack on Abyssinia. Britain and France are satisfied with symbolic sanctions against Mussolini, which do not bring him to his knees but drive Italy into the arms of Germany. In July 1936, General Franco starts an insurrection against the legal Spanish government. Hitler and Mussolini decide to help him. For 3 years, Germany secretly sends soldiers, technicians, and war supplies to Franco. Mussolini supports him openly. The Spanish Civil War is the brutal prelude to the Second World Conflagration. It cements the alliance between Hitler and Mussolini. There is discord in the camp of the Western powers. This indecision throws a light on the Austrian question. In 1934, Hitler began to threaten Austrian independence. The country was ruled by Dollfuss. In the spring of 1934, Dollfuss very brutally smashed a socialist insurrection against his scarcely democratic regime and thereby eliminated the very forces which were his natural allies in his fight against Hitler. Simultaneously, he tries to encourage the nation to resist Hitler. On the anniversary of the liberation of Vienna from the Turks, he compares this enemy of old with Hitler.
Diesen Tag und diese Zeit feiert, so ist es nicht eine gewöhnliche geschichtliche Erinnerung. Fremdgeist und fremde Ideen sind in unser Volk, haben sich eingenistet und haben böses Unheil angerichtet.
The Nazis in Vienna cause unrest in the streets and organize mass meetings which culminate in the visit to Vienna of the German ministers Frank and Kampf.
Vielen herzlichen Dank, lieber Parteigenosse und Mitkämpfer Frauenfeld, für den lieben Empfang, den Sie mir hier bereitet haben. Es ist eine unerhörte Freude, hier an der Stelle, wo unser Führer, der Schöpfer der Nationalsozialistischen Arbeiterpartei Adolf Hitler, seinen Lebenskampf begonnen hat als einfacher Handarbeiter, hier an dieser deutschesten Stelle des Ostens erneut betonen zu können, dass unser Führer Adolf Hitler stolz ist auf seine Wiener Heimat und dass er weiß, dass Wien zu ihm und seiner Bewegung, zur Idee des Völkerfriedens, zur Idee der nationalen Wohlfahrt, zur Idee der Freiheit und Reinheit des Volkslebens steht.
In July 1934, the Nazis attempt a coup. Dollfuss is murdered, but order is quickly restored and the Nazis flee in thousands to Germany. Mussolini still promises to support Austria and draws up battalion troops on the frontier. The Minister of Education, Schuschnigg, succeeds Dollfuss. The situation is stabilized. But Papen is appointed ambassador to Vienna and begins to undermine the country from within. In September 1937, Hitler and Mussolini meet in Munich. The demonstration of Germany's military might makes a deep impression on Mussolini, so that a few months later, he joins the Anti-Comintern Pact between Germany and Japan. He now informs the Germans that he no longer intends to be the guardian of Austrian independence. Hitler only needs an excuse to march into Austria. In March 1938, the unemployed painter from the flophouse on Meldemannstrasse marches into Vienna. He is received by Himmler, who the previous night has had 67,000 people arrested.
Dieses Land und dieses Volk kommt nicht zum Reich in einer demütigenden Rolle. Ich selber führe euch ein.
The conqueror, acknowledging the ovations in the ancient city of the emperors, is not satisfied with this triumph. His eye is directed toward the next goal, Czechoslovakia. His antagonist there, President Beneš, is an ally of France. He has the promise of Russia that if attacked by Germany, it will come to the help of Prague, providing the French comply with their obligations. The Czechs are strong enough to withstand the first assault. When the Sudeten German Nazi organizations cause an acute crisis in the districts inhabited by Germans, Prague mobilizes. We now know that a number of German generals had planned to overthrow Hitler as soon as he had started the war against the Czechs, and that Hitler would not have dared to bring matters to a head by being forced to fight against France and Britain in the west, and Russia and Czechoslovakia in the east. In this dilemma, Hitler is saved by British Prime Minister Chamberlain. He is convinced that it is possible to reason with dictators. When the war clouds gather over Europe, he visits Hitler in Berchtesgaden, and also acts as spokesman for France, whose foreign minister, Bonnet, wants peace at any price. Chamberlain's action leads to the Munich Agreement of September 29, 1938, between Germany, France, Great Britain, and Italy. The Sudetenland becomes German. The fate of Czechoslovakia is sealed. Beneš is forced to obey Hitler. The Western powers have betrayed their most faithful ally in the heart of Europe and have isolated Russia. The Soviet Union now changes the course of her foreign policy. Without firing a shot, Hitler captures Czech fortresses, guns, munitions, and machine guns to a value of $2 billion. In the spring of 1940, they will be used in the Blitzkrieg against France. The German generals in opposition drop their plans of a coup. It is not possible to arrest a man as a war criminal just when he is winning a bloodless victory. Hitler is already hatching new plans of conquest, while Chamberlain believes that Hitler's signature to a scrap of paper means peace in our time. After the Munich Agreement, the lot of the Jews in Germany deteriorates. 1 week after Munich, all Jews must have the letter J stamped in their papers. Himmler's right-hand man, Reinhard Heydrich, gets the idea of deporting 17,000 Polish Jews living in Germany to Poland. On November 17th, the 17-year-old son of one of these exiles shoots a German diplomat in Paris in order to focus the attention of the world on the Jewish tragedy. The victim is buried with every honor, and the deed is used as an excuse for the Night of Crystal, a pogrom reaching into every corner of Germany. Hundreds of synagogues are burned down, 7,500 Jewish shops plundered, 20,000 Jews arrested, and 10,000 of them taken to the concentration camp Buchenwald. The Jews are ordered to pay the damages themselves, and are collectively fined $1 billion. The last act of the Jewish drama has begun. After Munich, Hitler becomes surer and surer of himself. In March 1939, he occupies the independent part of Czechoslovakia. The Czechs are the first non-German nation within the Greater German Reich. At last, even Chamberlain understands that the Germans abroad were only an excuse for Hitler's power politics, which threatened both Eastern and Western Europe. Hitler's stormtroops continue to march.
Sie waren uns der Garant des Sieges. Sie sind uns der Garant des Friedens. Adolf Hitler! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil!
On his 50th birthday, on April 20th, 1939, Hitler receives homage from his party and Germans from all parts of the country.
Was ist unser heutiges Deutschland? Nicht wieder schön und herrlich. Indem ich euch überblicke, weiß ich, mein Lebenskampf ist nicht umsonst gekämpft. Ihr werdet treu sein, wie jemals nur Deutsche treu sein konnten. Immer wieder wird eine neue Jugend antreten in diese Stadt hier. Ich sehe das von mir in Jahrhunderten immer wieder antreten und wird immer schöner sein, immer kraftvoller sein und wird immer gesünder sein und wird immer mehr Hoffnung bieten den lebenden Geschlechtern auf die Zukunft. Ich bin nicht der Klagende, ich bin nur der Warner. Ich bin nicht der Fürchtende, sondern ich bin nur der Vorbereitende. Ich zittere nicht vor der Stunde irgendeiner Entscheidung, aber ich will sie sehen und ich will stark sein. Ich will die Füße fest in unsere Erde stemmen, um dem Ansturm nicht zu erliegen. Und ihr werdet neben mir stehen, wenn diese Stunde jemals kommen sollte. Ihr werdet vor mir, neben uns, Seiten und hinter mir stehen. Und wir werden in unserem Zeichen wieder siegen.
On September 1st, 1939, the German armed forces crossed the Polish frontier. Hitler informs the world that a state of war exists after the attack on Poland has started.
Habe ich nie kennengelernt. Es heißt Kapitulation. Und ich möchte daher jetzt der ganzen Umwelt gleich versichern, ein November 18 wird sie niemals mehr in der deutschen Geschichte wiederholen.
Great Britain and France do their duty as Poland's allies and declare war on Germany. For the first time, Hitler is faced by a united front. what purpose the blessing of the Church and Poland's flaming martial spirit against a superior enemy? The German Air Force bombs trains on the way to the front and destroys aircraft on the ground. Polish cavalry attacked German tanks. Hitler's Stukas bomb a station. Hitler's army advances through a desolated country, burning, ruined cities, either deserted or inhabited by a vanquished but undaunted populace. Partisans are captured, but their execution does not quell the resistance. The devastation spreads far and wide. Bridges are blown up, Polish forces encircled. Hitler thanks his soldiers for work well done. His shadow is Himmler, who organizes the terror in the occupied areas. After a few weeks, only the capture of Warsaw remains. The tenacious defense of the city enrages Hitler. With obvious satisfaction, he watches the reduction of Warsaw to a smoking ruin. For the first time, the world realizes the fate of civilian populations in total war. German soldiers march through the dead streets of Warsaw, surrounded by ruined buildings. The vanquished Poles began the long march to the prison cages. A victory parade is organized for Hitler. Hans Frank is appointed Governor General of Poland, and the country disappears from the headlines of the world press. Quietly, the systematic pillaging of the occupied country is begun. Hitler's henchmen carry out his new order and themselves photograph their brutal work. Market day in a small Polish town. Vegetables and meat are on sale as usual. A sudden unrest spreads quickly. German police, a raid. Jews must wear the Star of David on their arms, not carry it in their pockets. Hostages are taken. The police car which carries them away is already part of the daily scene. In Warsaw, there is a streetcar exclusively for Jews. In October 1940, a district 1.5 miles square is transformed into a ghetto. 240,000 Jews and 80,000 non-Jews live there. They must now move to make room for hundreds of thousands of fresh Jews dragged here from all over the Reich. To begin with, there are 6 people to a room, but the number soon rises to 13. Goebbels' own cameramen have taken these pictures, which show how an ordinary quarter of a town is transformed into a living hell. It was his intention to use them as propaganda, but he gave up the idea for fear that people would feel sympathy for the victims. The barbed wire round the prohibited area is soon replaced by a wall, behind which the Jews are herded like defenseless animals in a cage. The streets are crowded with people who once lived normally and are now transformed into starved bundles of rags. They are allotted 200 calories a day. Frank reduces the ration further. He realizes that this means increased mortality in the ghetto, but he explains that this war means the extermination of the Jews. The inhabitants of the ghetto must live and die like rats. They are shrouded in a stench of filth, wet clothes, and corpses. They sleep in rooms no better than overcrowded prison cells. stretched out on gray cardboard and hay mattresses. They await death as a savior. In the shadow of death, the children grow up, tortured by lice and disease, without laughter and toys, with old eyes accustomed to the sight of suffering and destruction. Death casts its shadow over the children's tenderness. On the streets, they beg or dance in the hope of cheating death yet another day. Famine's guards at the ghetto walls are merciless. A little girl from the ghetto said to her father, "I wish I were a dog. The guards don't beat dogs." People stand or lean close up to the walls to get a little warmth. The dead and dying lie in the streets, but the living no longer see them. Their sight is turned inwards. They know that tomorrow it may be their turn. Death reaps a rich harvest. The grave diggers cannot manage to collect all the corpses which lie abandoned in the gutters until they disappear forever in the lime pits of a silent mass grave. Without weeping or tears, all traces of indescribable suffering are erased. An unknown mother's lullaby falls on deaf ears under a gray and empty sky. Outside this sealed-off world, the terror continues against the Polish people. Day by day, the Poles are more convinced that the master race has collectively condemned them. The resistance against the German grows, in spite of the fact that it is common knowledge that whoever fashions weapons or refuses to acknowledge that he is of a lower order is doomed to a fearful death. This battle is fought in silence. Only much later the world hears about it. The war in the West now occupies the international scene. On April 9th, 1940, Hitler invades Denmark and Norway. Only a year before, he offered these countries non-aggression pacts. The march continues over the frontiers of Holland and Belgium. In June 1940, an armistice with the French was signed. German troops marched through Paris. Hitler has erased the Versailles Treaty. Britain remains. Goering's aircraft take the offensive and fight bitter battles with the British, who retain the mastery of the air. The ruthless raids on industrial towns such as Coventry unite the British people. British towns are transformed into heaps of ruins, but the will to fight only grows on the island. Preparations against a German invasion are made.
British nation, it stirred and moved, and it never has been at any time in its long, eventful, famous history. And it is no hackneyed trope of speech to say that they mean to conquer or to die. What a triumph the life of these battered cities is over the worst that fire and bomb can do.
Chamberlain's successor, the leader of a fighting England, Winston Churchill, assures himself of American support at a meeting with President Roosevelt in the Atlantic even before the United States comes into the war. The Atlantic Charter proclaims the 4 freedoms, a joint declaration of war aims and human rights. But the German invasion of England never came. 5 months after the collapse of France, Hitler prepares to attack the Soviet Union. 2 years earlier, he made a non-aggression pact with Stalin.
Russland und Deutschland haben im Weltkrieg gegeneinander gekämpft. Und beide waren letzten Endes die Leidtragenden. Ein zweites Mal soll und wird das nicht ja passiert.
The Soviet Union is invaded on a broad front. The goal is the quick capture of Moscow. Once again, the German troops advance rapidly over devastated and unfriendly soil. German victories are costly. Hitler fails to take Moscow. He is surprised by the winter, which takes its toll of an insufficiently equipped army. Near Moscow, Sebastopol, and in many other places, the Red Army stemmed the German advance. Now the fortunes of war began to turn on all fronts. In October 1942, the British 8th Army under General Montgomery breaks through the German lines at El Alamein. After 12 days of fighting, Germany has lost the war in Africa.
Kampf
And the lower Volga. 80 divisions are thrown into the battle on the southern front. They have to pay the price for Hitler's fight for world domination. In November, 3 Red armies attacked north and south of Stalingrad, and Hitler loses the initiative. In a few months, this once flourishing city is transformed into a scrap heap. The Red armies recapture Stalingrad after a battle which rages from street to street and house to house. On January 30th, 1943, Hitler's Reich celebrates its 10th anniversary. On the following day, Field Marshal Paulus capitulates in Stalingrad, going into captivity with 91,000 men. The Battle of Stalingrad cost Germany and her allies 142,000 lives.
Und jeder Deutsche noch in 1000 Jahren muss mit heiligen Schauern das Wort Stalingrad aussprechen und sich erinnern, dass dort Deutschland letzten Endes doch den Stempel zum Endsieg gesetzt hat. 10 Jahre, meine Kameraden, hat uns der Führer jetzt von Größe zu Größe geführt, zum Heile, aus Ohnmacht heraus, aus Armut heraus, aus schrecklichen Verhältnissen.
Kamerad, woher stammst du?
Aus Friesenland.
Und du, Kamerad?
Aus Bayern.
Und du?
Vom Kaiserstuhl.
Und du?
Aus Pommern. Und aus Königsberg.
Aus Schlesien.
Von der Waterkant. Vom Schwarzwald. Aus Dresden.
Von der Donau.
Vom Rhein.
Und von der Saar.
Ein Volk. Ein Führer.
Das Deutschland von einst hat um 11:45 die Waffen niedergelegt. Ich habe grundsätzlich immer erst 5 Minuten nach 12 aufgehört. Ich wollte zur Wolga kommen. An einer bestimmten Stelle, an einer bestimmten Stadt, Zufälligerweise trägt sie den Namen von Stalin selber, aber denken Sie nur nicht, dass ich deswegen dort losmarschiert bin. Sie könnte auch ganz anders heißen, sondern nur, weil dort ein ganz wichtiger Punkt ist. Weil ich kein zweites Verdun machen will. Ausgerechnet Stalingrad, ein kapitaler Fehler, das ein strategischer Fehler. Jetzt wollen wir mal abwarten, ob das ein strategischer Fehler war. Und da kann man schon mir glauben, was wir einmal besitzen, das halten wir dann schon auch tatsächlich so fest, dass in diesem Krieg jedenfalls ein anderer dort, wo wir stehen, nicht mehr hinkommt. Da kann man sich drauf verlassen.
The Battle of Stalingrad is the turning point of the war, the beginning of the great retreats and great reverses. It is no longer a question of blitzkrieg, but a hope of holding positions. Many lives are still squandered in senseless battle. Slave workers from all the occupied countries are now dragged to Germany to serve Hitler's war industries. By the end of 1944, 4,795,000 men and women have been deported to Germany from Russia, Poland, France, and Holland, Yugoslavia, and even Italy. Arrested on the streets or in their homes, they are transported in cattle trucks, and many die on the way. In Eastern Europe, Himmler sets up huge concentration camps. They swallow up hundreds of thousands of people. The healthy become slave workers in branches of German factories. The others are doomed. People from all occupied Europe are brought here to become numbers in a nameless mass. Work gives freedom, declared Rudolf Höss, the commandant of the Auschwitz concentration camp. But the only free people in this world of his are the dead. Cross-examined after the war, Höss stated that in Auschwitz alone, approximately 2.5 million people were liquidated, mostly Poles, Russians, Gypsies, and Jews. It was Höss's idea to use the cyanide compound Cyclone B for the mass extermination of humans. As he once wrote, "It guarantees an absolutely certain and quick death, especially in crowded, dry, and airtight chambers." The condemned were led into gas chambers which were built to look like ordinary shower baths. First came the women and children. The doors were locked and the gas introduced through ventilators. After 20 minutes at the most, all were dead. The victims' gold teeth and the women's hair were removed. The corpses were burned. Crematoria 1 and 2 in Auschwitz had a capacity of 2,000 corpses a day. Höss wrote, "More was not possible if one did not wish to run the risk of damaging the plant." The greatest number of gassed and burned in 24 hours in the entire Auschwitz plant was reached during the summer of 1944, when in less than 2 months, most of a group of 400,000 Jews from Hungary were gassed to death. This action was led by SS Obersturmbannführer Adolf Eichmann. This SS hangman carefully maintained his anonymity and was among the war criminals who escaped 15 years after the German capitulation, Israeli agents captured him in his hiding place. In this way, the Death's Head units of the SS carried out the systematic extermination of human beings as the first step towards the new order in Europe based on race. Under orders of a man who in his youth in the slums of Vienna discovered that what he hated most was the Jews. He became powerful enough to order the murder of millions of people and to be obeyed. Orders are orders. But those condemned to death or a life of slavery were not always content with their fate. In April 1943, Himmler orders the Warsaw Ghetto razed to the ground and the Jews transported to the death camps. During almost 3 weeks, the inhabitants of the ghetto resist the SS and police troops, which, under Major General Stropp, systematically burn down house after house. The inhabitants are left with the choice of either dying in the conflagration or leaping from the balconies. When the uprising has been suppressed, the victor's booty consists of 9 rifles, 59 pistols, a few hundred hand grenades. For the first time, the unarmed victim has risen against his executioner. He knew he had to die, but he wanted to die on his feet. After the liquidation of the ghetto, the fight continues in Poland. In 1944, it is plain that the Germans cannot hold the country. To establish Polish authority before the entry of the Red Army, General Bohr gives the signal for an uprising on August 1st, 1944. The battle between Germans and Poles lasts 63 days and claims 200,000 Polish lives. In October, the surviving Poles are forced to leave the city and live in the woods. The city is systematically destroyed. This picture has no documents about the reasons why the Soviet army already operating near Warsaw did not attempt to help the Polish insurgents. Increased terror cannot save Hitler's regime. The situation becomes acute in 1944. On June 6, the Western Allies land in Normandy under the command of General Eisenhower. The decisive battle for Europe has begun. In this situation, a number of officers and politicians attempt to remove Hitler. On July 20th, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg hides a bomb under Hitler's table in the headquarters in East Prussia. As Hitler's usual concrete bunker is under repair, the meeting is held in a wooden barrack, and this saves his life. The bomb blows out the roof and thin walls. Hitler suffers minor burns, and his right arm is paralyzed. Hitler takes a fearful revenge. 4,980 people are executed during the following months and thousands sent to the concentration camp. A so-called People's Court under the presidency of Freisler pronounces death sentences en masse. At the first trial, Field Marshal von Witzleben is forced to appear without braces or belt. The Nazi veteran and chief of police in Berlin, Count Helldorf, is one of the conspirators.
Sie haben ferner bekundet, dass Ihnen die Einstellung der Partei zum Adel nicht zugesagt haben. Ist mir nun völlig unverständlich. Sie waren Polizeipräsident der Reichshauptstadt. Oder ich könnte ihn, wie Sie wissen, Gruppenführer und Obergruppenführer nennen. Aller Gliederungen der NSDAP, die auch adlig war. Ich muss auch bekennen, dass ich nicht, wie viele meiner Parteigenossen, nämlich wie alle Parteigenossen, bedingungslos dem Führer ergeben bin.
Count Schwerin von Schwanenfeld states that he has thought of the many murders.
Morde? Sie sind ja ein schäbiger Lump. Brechen Sie unter der Gemeinheit? Ja oder nein? Verbrechen Sie darunter?
Präsident.
Ja oder nein auf eine klare Antwort.
Nein.
Nein, Sie können auch nicht mehr zerbrechen. Denn Sie sind ja nur noch ein Häufchen Elend, das vor sich keine Achtung mehr hat.
Im Namen des deutschen Volkes,
Ehrgeiz zerfressene, ehrlose, feige Verräter sind Karl Gördeler, Wilhelm Leuschner, Josef Wirmer und Ulrich von Hassel. Sie verschworen sich, Gördeler sogar als politischer Grund für unsere Feinde, mit einer Gruppe eidbrüchiger Offiziere, die unseren Führer ermorden wollte. Als Minister einer feindhörigen Verräterregierung unser Volk in dunkler Reaktion zu knechten und unseren Feinden auf Gnade und Ungnade auszuliefern. Statt mannhaft wie das ganze deutsche Volk dem Führer folgend unseren Sieg zu erkämpfen, verrieten sie das Opfer unserer Krieger, Volk, Führer und Reich. Sie werden mit dem Tode bestraft. Ihr Vermögen verfällt dem Reich.
After the abortive assassination, the army is completely humiliated. The Nazi salute is introduced as a sign of its unbreakable loyalty to the Führer and its ties with the party. The SS troops become of equal rank. Himmler is given command of the reservists. War draws ever nearer Germany. Now it is German troops which are retreating.
Wollt ihr den totalen Krieg? Wollt ihr ihn, wenn nötig, totaler und radikaler, als wir ihn uns heute überhaupt erst vorstellen können?
Those who did not applaud then suffer just as much now. The last reserves are thrown into an already hopeless battle. The end is already near when Goebbels visits the city of Görlitz in March 1945, together with Field Marshal Schörner.
Dass unsere Soldaten, wenn sie jetzt an diesem oder an jenem Teil der Ostfront zur Offensive antreten, keinen Pardon mehr kennen und keinen Pardon mehr geben. Jene Divisionen, die jetzt schon zu kleinen Offensiven angetreten sind und in den nächsten Wochen und Monaten zu Großoffensiven antreten werden, werden in diesen Kampf hineingehen wie in einen Gottesdienst. Und wenn sie ihre Gewehre schultern und ihre Panzerfahrzeuge besteigen, dann haben sie nur ihre erschlagenen Kinder und geschändeten Frauen vor Augen und ein Schrei der Rache wird aus ihren Kehlen emporsteigen, vor dem der Feind erblassen wird. So wie der Führer die Krisen der Vergangenheit bewältigt hat, so wird er diese bewältigen. Er ist fest davon überzeugt. Noch vorgestern sagte er mir, ich glaube so fest daran, dass wir diese Krise bewältigen werden. Und ich glaube so fest daran, dass wenn wir unsere neuen Offensivearmeen hineinwerfen, dass wir den Feind schlagen und zurückjagen werden. Und ich glaube so fest, dass wir eines Tages den Sieg an unserer Fahnen heften werden, wie ich je in meinem Leben an etwas fest geglaubt habe. Unserem Führer Adolf Hitler, Sieg! Sieg! Sieg!
German Newsreel, March 1945.
Der Führer, dessen Leben Tag und Nacht in ununterbrochener Arbeit und Sorge dem Schicksalskampf der deutschen Nation geweiht ist, besucht einen Divisionsgefechtsstand im Osten. Dem Führer werden die Offiziere des Stabes vorgestellt. Auch bei den Männern hat es sich schnell herumgesprochen. Der Führer ist da. Die freudige Begrüßung der Soldaten ist wie ein Treuegelöbnis aller Kämpfenden an den Mann, der Deutschlands und Europas Schicksal in den Händen hält und meistern wird.
The last pictures taken of Hitler show him together with some youngsters who relate how they have risked their lives for him.
Ich habe zunächst mit 13 meiner Kameraden unter dem Befehl unseres Bandführers am Stadtrand von Hindenburg-West gelegen. Diesen sollten wir gegen einbrechende feindliche Panzer sichern. Als diese dann aus der Richtung Gleiwitz am 24. Januar anrollten, teilte der Bandführer uns in 2 Gruppen ein und während er mit der einen gegen die Panzer vorrang, um diese selbst anzugreifen, gaben wir anderen ihm den Feuerschutz. Unser Bandführer hat 3 Panzer abgeschossen und ist dann leider bei der Vernichtung des 4. gefallen. Nachdem wir seinen Tod festgestellt hatten, mussten wir uns aus taktischen Gründen auf einen Eisenbahndamm zurückziehen. Und dort habe ich dann am Abend die unter diesem hindurchführende Straße von Gleiwitz nach Hindenburg, die den Zug auf zur Stadt bildete, gesprengt.
Als der Russe näher an Lauban heranrückte, habe ich mich dem Kampfkommandanten von Lauban freiwillig als Melder zur Verfügung gestellt. Meine Aufgabe bestand darin, Meldungen zu den einzelnen Kompaniegefechtsständen zu bringen. Außerdem habe ich oftmals Panzerfäuste und Verpflegung in die Hauptkampflinie geschafft. Die Panzerfäuste habe ich auf Leiterwagen oder kaum unter feindlichem Beschuss in die Haarkeile geschafft.
The end approaches as a logical sequence. Everything repeats itself. Berlin's fate is in the balance. The Russians enter a ruined city. Hitler avoids the consequences of his acts by committing suicide in his bunker on April 29, 1945. General Keitel signs the instrument of surrender.
Ein Wort habe ich nie kennengelernt. Es heißt Kapitulation. Und ich möchte daher jetzt der ganzen Umwelt gleich versichern. Ein November 18 wird sie niemals mehr in der deutschen Geschichte wiederholen.
The Nazi leaders who have been put on trial in Nuremberg all declare themselves innocent of the crimes of the Hitler Reich.
Ich bekenne mich im Sinne der Anklage nicht schuldig. Rudolf Hess.
Nein.
Ich bekenne mich im Sinne der Anklage für nicht schuldig. Wilhelm Keitel. Ich bekenne mich nicht schuldig.
Nicht schuldig.
Nicht schuldig. Bin in keiner Weise schuldig.
Did Hitler do everything himself? Silent questions lie in the air when the concentration camps are opened. The inmates look out to freedom and unknown existence. first steps toward life are uncertain and careful. These children escaped death in the gas chambers. They are twins. The SS doctors were saving them for experiments, as if they were mice or rabbits. In Sonnenburg, the fleeing SS executioners left behind the corpses of 735 German anti-fascists who might have been unpleasant witnesses. Nine million human beings died in the concentration camps. Of those, 5,978,000 were Jews. 72% of Europe's Jewry and 85% of Poland's. What have the dead left behind in the camps? Ownerless suitcases. 500,000 abandoned articles of clothing. Shoes which have trod the last road. Spectacles which have seen the indescribable. Toys no one is going to play with anymore. Women's hair, which was too late to be used as raw material in the war industries. Teeth. The gold fillings have already been removed and melted down. At least 25 million soldiers are estimated to have fallen on the various fronts during the Second World War. The victims among the civilian population have been estimated at 24 million. Innumerable mass graves bear witness to what happened. It must never happen again. Never again.